The fourth-floor conference room of the Cartwright building held 60 people on a Friday in July, and 59 of them were wearing better shoes than Wes Corrigan. He stood at the back in his work boots and his gray shirt with the sleeves rolled because the all-hands cost review had been made mandatory for every department. And as of that morning, he was still, technically, a department. At the front of the room, Desmond Hale advanced to his favorite slide. The new chief financial officer was a tall, precise man who wore his glasses like an instrument and had never once been late to anything. The slide showed a single number in a font usually reserved for warnings. $11,000, Hale said, and let it sit there. That is the value of the hours our building engineer has worked this year alone without billing anyone. Repairs to personal property, favors, projects no one authorized. He looked up and found Wes at the back of the room, the way a hawk finds a field mouse. We are a design firm, Mr. Corrigan, not a charity. You are a handyman, not a hero. 60 pairs of eyes did the thing where they look at a man without turning their heads. Wes said nothing. He had a great deal of practice at saying nothing, and it showed. Then the chief executive officer spoke from her seat at the front without turning around. Naomi Voss had run the firm her father built for 2 years, and her voice in a meeting was cool water over stone. He's right, she said. Stop fixing things for free. The room relaxed, the way a room does when the highest authority picks a side. And that might have been the end of it, except that Wes Corrigan looked across all those better shoes, straight at the back of her head, and ran out of room to be small in. Then stop breaking things on purpose. The silence that followed had a texture to it. Naomi Voss turned around slowly and did not look away. And something crossed her face that no one in that room could name, though every single one of them would try at lunch. At the front, Desmond Hale reached for his laptop with the expression of a man who has just been handed a search warrant. Stay with this one, because what those work order logs were about to show, nobody in that room saw coming, least of all the man they were about to fire. 6 weeks earlier, the fourth floor was already haunted. Wes Corrigan's days began at 6, with a hairbrush he had learned to use from a video, one-handed, 8 years of practice behind him now. Josie sat on the kitchen stool eating cereal in order of color, while her father built the braid she called the strong one, for days with a spelling test in them. Tighter, she said. Marcy says my braids are lazy. Marcy is 7 and has never once been right about anything, Wes said, and tied it off, and she grinned into her bowl. By 7, he was in the basement of the Cartwright, a 1920s landmark with steam risers older than every employee in it. And by 7:05, he had the day's queue up on the screen in his workshop. The official tickets were ordinary. A door closer on 3, a cracked outlet cover in accounting. And then there were the others, the ones he did off the books and off the clock. The intern's bicycle with the dragging brake in the freight room. Pearl Sandoval's space heater, which was older than the intern. A designer's window box that had flooded onto the sill. He fixed them at lunch, or at 6, and billed nobody. And if anyone asked why, he tightened something until the question went away. Dom Ferreira leaned in the doorway with his coffee and squinted at the queue. Fourth floor again. That's 41 tickets off one floor since spring, Wes. Either the executive floor is haunted or somebody up there likes the service. Old building, Wes said. Old building, Dom agreed, in the tone of a man agreeing with nothing. Pearl Sandoval's space heater was a case study in the way Wes ran his life. The heater sat under the executive floor reception desk, violated at least 2 policies, and dated from an era when appliances were built to outlive their owners out of spite. Facilities had red-tagged it twice. Pearl had unred-tagged it twice, on the grounds that the 4th floor's climate control was designed for men in jackets, and she had stopped wearing jackets during a previous administration. So once a season, Wes took the heater to the basement, opened it up, replaced whatever had worn, tested it past every standard it had been born under, and returned it before lunch. No ticket, no invoice. Pearl paid him in intelligence, which on the executive floor of a design firm was a currency stronger than the dollar. Hale's people were in the archive again, she told him that week, not looking up from the visitor log. 3rd time. Nobody photographs an archive because they love drawings. Maybe they love drawings, Pearl. Nobody from a company called Total Facility Care has ever loved anything, Pearl said, and stamped a delivery slip like it had personally disappointed her. His lunches went the same way they always had. 20 minutes for the sandwich, 20 for whoever had found him that morning, with the sheepish look and the "it's probably nothing." This week it was the new intern's bicycle brake, dragging so badly the kid had been walking it home 3 miles rather than say anything, and a junior designer's window box, which had flooded her sill and was threatening a client presentation, stacked below it. He fixed both, told no one, and got back to the boiler with 4 minutes to spare. The 4th floor tickets had a personality to them. A pendant lamp over the small conference table that flickered, but only on Tuesdays. A chair that wobbled for no reason a level could find. And the executive kitchen's coffee machine, an expensive Italian thing that died approximately weekly, always at mid-morning, always when the floor was quiet. He was elbow-deep in that machine on a Tuesday when Naomi Voss came in with 2 mugs and set one beside his wrench, as if this were a thing that happened at companies. "It's the pump again," she said, with the confidence of a woman who had no idea what a pump was. "It's never been the pump." He reassembled the machine, which had, as usual, nothing wrong with it that running it could not fix. She asked him how the boiler was feeling about the humidity. She asked whether Josie's science project had survived the bus. She asked questions no chief executive needed answered, and he answered them, and 10 minutes went somewhere neither of them tracked. After she left, he tightened a screw on the cabinet hinge that was not loose and pretended not to know it, and whistled very quietly all the way down in the freight elevator. He had been at the Cartwright 14 years, and the building had taught him everything twice. Amos Greeley, the old chief engineer, had hired him at 23 and walked him through the basement with one hand on the pipes, like a doctor taking a pulse. You could not learn the Cartwright from a manual, Amos said, because the manual had burned in a file cabinet fire during the Nixon administration. And anyway, the building lied to strangers. It ran cold for new men. It settled for patient ones. Wes turned out to be a patient one. The teacher came 2 years in. A second-grade classroom in a borrowed annex 6 blocks over. A radiator that clanked like a prisoner, and frost on the inside of the glass in January. The district said the repair would be scheduled. The teacher, whose name was Annie, had moved all 17 desks to the warm corner and was teaching in her coat, pockets full of confiscated marbles. And Wes fixed the radiator on a Saturday for nothing because the alternative was children learning fractions in mittens. She found out he had waived the invoice and marched into the freight room of the Cartwright to argue about it, and stayed 40 minutes and lost the argument on purpose. She argued the way she taught, patiently, in complete sentences, moving the pieces of his logic around like desks until he could see his own warm corner. He argued back with a wrench in his hand and no idea he was being taught. Dom, who witnessed the whole thing from the loading dock, would say for years afterward that he had watched a man get renovated. She came back the next week with a thermos and a follow-up argument. Then, with her class's thank you cards, 17 of them, several addressed to the radiator man. By the fourth visit, neither of them was pretending it was about the invoice. And by June, he had met her mother, who looked him up and down and told Annie, within earshot, that this one came with his own tools, which in her family was apparently scripture. The wedding was small and the marriage was not. It filled the apartment, then the little house, then every corner of him that had been quietly furnished with nothing. Annie graded papers at the kitchen table while he rebuilt whatever the neighbors had given up on, and the two of them conducted a running argument about the ethics of billing that neither wanted to win, because winning would have ended it. When he finally did send her school an invoice, at her insistence, she crossed out the total and wrote a rule across the bottom, in red pen, teacher's handwriting, and handed it back. You don't bill for kindness. It ruins the math of it. He married her 2 years later. Josie arrived in the spring after that, in March, furious about everything, 10 days early. Annie said their daughter got the schedule from him and the temper from the radiator. 5 winters later, on an ordinary January morning, Annie Corrigan's heart stopped in a school parking lot before the first bell, a condition nobody had found because nobody had looked, and no Saturday repair in the world could reach it. Josie was 3. The casseroles lasted a month. The silence lasted longer. He learned the parts of the day that grief lives in, not the nights, which at least had a shape, but the small mechanical moments, the second coffee cup taken down by habit, the red pen in the junk drawer, the school district's automated calls that still, for one unbearable autumn, used her classroom number. He learned the braid from a video, badly, then adequately, then well, practicing on a doll at midnight, like a man studying for the only exam that had ever mattered. Amos Greeley, long retired, drove in twice a month that first year and sat in the workshop not fixing anything, which was his way of saying the things he did not say. The building runs cold for new men, Amos told him once, apropos of nothing. It settles for patient ones. Wes understood he was not talking about the building. Josie asked her practical questions, and he answered everyone straight, because Annie had taught 17 7-year-olds at a time, and her rule about children was the same as her rule about invoices. You don't shortchange them, it ruins the math. Grief did not make Wes softer or harder. It made him precise about what mattered. That first spring alone, he fixed the neighbor's fence and threw the invoice in a kitchen drawer unsent, because sending it felt like arguing with a woman in red pen. Then a co-worker's stroller. Then the school stage curtain, the church basement dehumidifier, the crossing guard's storm door. Every unbilled job went into the drawer on a slip of paper, not as debts, but the way other men keep photographs. The drawer filled slowly, and the math of it, by Annie's arithmetic, came out ahead every year. Desmond Hale arrived at Voss Design Group in April with a mandate from the board, a short list of vendors, and a briefcase that could have deflected small arms fire. He was not a cruel man. He was something more dangerous in a budget year. He was certain. Certainty had been good to Desmond Hale. It had carried him through 3 turnarounds at 3 firms, each of which he had left leaner, more profitable, and mildly traumatized. He rose at 5, rode an ergometer exactly 9 kilometers, and read budgets the way other men read box scores. The board had brought him in because Voss Design Group's margins had gone soft in the 2 years since Elliot Voss died, and because a portion of the board suspected, in the way boards suspect, that the daughter ran the place on inheritance and instinct. Hale's mandate was to find the fat. He was very good at finding the fat. His limitation, unbudgeted, was that he had spent 30 years mistaking everything he could not price for fat. He walked the building in his second week with a contractor's representative named Kurt Bevins, who wore a polo shirt with a national logo on it and carried a clipboard like a menu. They priced the lobby. They priced the elevators. In the boiler room, Hale looked at the 1928 steam plant, kept alive past all reason and running at 94% efficiency, and saw only that it did not appear on any depreciation schedule he recognized. If it can't be priced, Hale said, it can't be managed. It can be priced, Bevins said. Rip and replace. You're looking at $1.2 million. And him? Hale nodded toward the workshop where Wes was rebuilding a valve actuator that the manufacturer had discontinued before either man had gotten his first job. Him you can replace with a contract, Bevins said. Everybody can be replaced with a contract. The audit began that week. Hale was thorough, because Hale was always thorough, and what he found offended him in a place spreadsheets keep sacred. An engineer whose hours wandered. Repairs with no requisition. $11,000 of labor this calendar year, billed to absolutely no one. He flagged it in yellow first, then, after reflection, in red. That same Tuesday, the pendant lamp on 4 was reported flickering again, and Wes went up with his ladder and finally did what he had been putting off for weeks. He opened the fixture all the way and tested every inch of it. New ballast, sound wiring, clean contacts. There was nothing wrong with the lamp. There had never been anything wrong with the lamp. He sat on the top of the ladder in the empty conference room for a while, holding a component that had no fault in it, doing a different kind of math. 41 tickets. He had checked everyone twice. Now he started checking something else, and the answer kept coming up the same, and the answer had a corner office and terrible taste in coffee machine excuses. He closed the ticket as no fault found, and smiled at the ceiling like an idiot, and stopped smiling, because when he got back to the basement, the audit memo was waiting in his inbox with his own name in it, next to the words redundant spend. The memo recommended eliminating the position of building engineer and transitioning facilities to Meridian Total Facility Care, effective the end of August. Pending review. Pending a meeting. Pending, as far as Wes could tell, nothing at all. He read it twice, put his phone in his pocket, and went back to the actuator, because the actuator, at least, could be fixed by him. He told Dom that afternoon, flatly, before the rumor could dress itself up. Dom set his coffee down and offered to organize what he called a response, which Wes understood to mean something between a petition and a barricade, and declined. He told Pearl, who said nothing at all, which from Pearl was the sound of machinery beginning to move. He did not tell Josie. There were 8 weeks of summer left, and a man can carry a thing 8 weeks if the reason is at the kitchen table eating cereal in order of color. What the memo did not say was that he would spend his last weeks training his replacements. Bevins' crew came through in pairs, photographing valve tags, scanning his hand-drawn riser diagrams, asking which switches did what. It would have been easy to teach them badly. It would have been undetectable. A wrong note here, a skipped ritual there, and by October, the building would be punishing strangers, and the phone would ring for the only man it trusted. He taught them properly. He corrected their notes. He showed them the boiler's cold morning ritual, the order of valves that the manual would have specified if the manual had survived Nixon. "You know you're training us to take your job," Kurt Bevins said on the second morning, not unkindly. "I'm training you to take care of the building," Wes said. "That's different." Bevins studied him for a moment, a man doing arithmetic of his own. 14 years in one basement, he said. "You could have gone anywhere. Hospital campus, data center, twice the money." "Hospitals have their own guy," Wes said, and showed him the standpipe heater, and where the bypass hid, and what would happen the first hard freeze somebody trusted the gauge instead of their hand. What he did not show anybody was the arithmetic at his own kitchen table. Josie's asthma plan ran through the firm's insurance, and the pediatric pulmonologist, who had finally gotten her nights quiet, was in network by the grace of a single line in a single appendix. 2 nights that week, he sat up late with the marketplace open in one browser tab and the contractor's careers page open in another, doing the math every single parent knows, the one with no good column. When Josie patted out at 11 for water and asked why he was still up, he said big building stuff, and she nodded like a colleague and went back to bed, and he closed both tabs and went back to the binder, because worry was free, but the binder was useful. There was the insurance to think about, which was really Josie to think about, her inhaler and the asthma plan and the pediatric pulmonologist who was, by some miracle, in network. There was the mortgage that a widower pays alone. He said none of this to anyone. He swallowed it the way he had swallowed 5 years of worse, and it sat in him, and he kept his voice level and his notes generous. Naomi caught him in the freight elevator on a Thursday between floors, the two of them and a hand truck. She looked at him the way people look at a sentence they cannot start. The audit had boxed her in. Hale had the board's ear and the numbers, and her father's old allies were watching to see whether the daughter would run the firm on sentiment. Every instinct she had was tied behind her back, and some of the knots were hers. "Wes," she started. "4th floor," he said gently, because the doors were opening. "Something's always breaking up there." She stepped out. The doors closed. 2 people had stood in a steel box built for furniture, each carrying a secret the other would have paid to hear. And the elevator, which knew everything, said nothing. The all-hands was set for Friday. The termination review, though nobody used the word, was set for the Monday after. Wes spent Thursday night at the kitchen table with Josie asleep down the hall, finishing the handover binder. It ran 206 pages. Every quirk, every workaround, every hand-drawn diagram of the risers, the boiler ritual, the winter schedule, the summer schedule, the actuator rebuild, the standpipe heater that had to be checked by hand, every hard freeze. A man who kept 10% of what he knew would stay employed forever. He typed the last of the 100% at 1 in the morning and printed 2 copies, one for the contractor, one for the building, and went to bed on the side he still thought of as his. Friday came, and the conference room, and the slide with the number on it. Charity, handyman, not a hero. Her voice like cool water, saying the thing that boxed-in people say, and his own voice crossing the room before he could price the consequences. 8 words that were either a joke, an accusation, or a love letter, depending on who was listening. Then stop breaking things on purpose. That night, alone in his office with the building empty around him, Desmond Hale opened the maintenance system and pulled the work order logs, looking for the thing careless men always assume they will find, evidence that the engineer had been inflating his tickets. He sorted by floor. The 4th floor rose to the top like cream. He sorted the 4th floor by requester, and the screen gave him one name 41 times, and Desmond Hale sat back in his chair and took his glasses off, which for him was the equivalent of a scream. The Monday meeting was scheduled for a conference room with frosted glass, the kind of room where companies keep their quiet. Hale sat at the head with the employment file squared in front of him. Human Resources sat to his left with the folder they bring when a decision has already been made. Naomi sat at the window end, pale and perfectly composed, the way her father used to be at funerals. Wes came in work clothes. If they were going to end it, they could end it with a man dressed for the job. Hale had reached his second sentence when the door opened without a knock, and Pearl Sandoval came in carrying a bound stack of photocopies against her chest like a hymnal. Pearl had sat at the executive floor desk for 40 years, under 4 chief executives, and had watched everything with the eyes of a woman doing a much longer audit. Nobody had invited her. Retirement was 11 months away, and she had decided, visibly, that she could afford the risk. "This is a closed meeting," Hale said. "It's a frosted glass room on my floor," Pearl said. "Nothing on this floor is closed to me. Ask anyone." "You'll want this," she said, and set the stack on the table. "Before you do something expensive." It was a ledger. Her own, kept in her own hand, 40 years of dates. The night in February, 6 years back, when the standpipe froze, and Wes thawed it by hand at 2 a.m, standing on a ladder in an unheated shaft, and the archive below it, 4 decades of original drawings, stayed dry. The code inspection he walked through for free on a Sunday so the firm's expansion would not slip a quarter. The water claim that never happened, priced by the insurer's own tables at $140,000, prevented by a $9 gasket and a man who checked things nobody told him to check. The blackout, 3 summers ago, when half the block went dark during a client review, and the Cartwright's light stayed on because somebody had rebuilt the transfer switch on his own time the previous spring for the listed cost of nothing. Page after page, in a receptionist's tidy hand, was the shadow ledger of the building, everything that had not happened, dated, priced, and initialed. Companies keep meticulous records of every disaster they suffer, and none at all of the ones they were spared. Pearl Sandoval had kept that second set of books for 40 years, waiting to see if anyone would ever be foolish enough to need them. "You priced his hours, Mr. Hale," Pearl said. "I priced his absences. Mine's the bigger number." Hale, to his credit, read the first 3 pages in full. Then, because certainty dies hard, he went for the kill anyway. He turned the projector on and put the work order log on the wall. 41 tickets, 1 floor, and prepared to say the word pattern in a meaningful way. "Before you sort that by requester," Naomi said, "I'd like to save you the trouble." She stood. In the frosted glass room, her voice did not sound like cool water anymore. It sounded like someone unlocking a door from the inside. "Nothing on my floor was ever broken. The lamp is fine. The chair is fine. The coffee machine is Italian, but it's fine. I filed every one of those tickets myself. She looked at the log on the wall, 41 lines with her name hiding in the data, and then at the man in work clothes at the far end of the table. 10 minutes at a time, that man is the only person in this building who talks to me like I'm real. Everyone needs one honest thing in their day. Mine came with a tool bag, so if you want to bill someone for his time, Desmond, bill me. I can afford exactly 41 apologies. Nobody moved. On the wall, the projector hummed over its evidence, which had just changed sides. The woman from Human Resources looked at her folder as though it might contain instructions for this, which it did not. Pearl Sandoval, who had watched 4 chief executives learn to be human at various speeds, permitted herself the smallest nod, the kind she usually reserved for correctly filled out forms. 41 tickets, Wes said into the quiet. It was the first thing he had said in the meeting. You want to know the worst part? I fixed every one of them. Twice? Some of them. He shook his head slowly. There is nothing wrong with that lamp, Ms. Voss. There was never anything wrong with that lamp. I know, she said. It's a very reliable lamp. Wes looked at her the length of the table, and what was on his face was not triumph and was not surprise. It was the expression of a man watching a lamp finally admit it. Desmond Hale closed his laptop without being asked. The meeting had stopped being his, and precise men know the moment it happens. The outsourcing motion did not survive the week. The board kept Meridian on for overflow work, seasonal projects, the things one man genuinely cannot do alone, which is how Kurt Bevins ended up with a contract he described, without bitterness, as the sane version. The employment file went back in its drawer. Human Resources took their folder away unopened, which is the happiest thing that folder ever does. Hale did not apologize immediately because Hale did nothing immediately except mathematics. He took Pearl's ledger away for 3 days and reran it line by line against the insurer's tables and the vendor quotes, fully expecting to debunk it, and instead confirmed it to within 4%, which for Pearl's arithmetic amounted to a standing ovation. On the 4th day, he came down to the boiler room with his own printout and stood at a respectful distance from the steam plant, like a man visiting an animal he had misjudged. Your math was better than mine, Hale said. That does not happen to me often. It wasn't my math, Wes said. It was my wife's. Hale considered that, nodded once, and did a thing nobody upstairs would have believed. He asked what the rule was. And Wes told him, red pen and all, and the chief financial officer of Voss Design Group wrote it down, because data is data. She was a teacher, Hale said, reading his own note back. Your wife, eh? 2nd grade, 17 kids at a time. Hale put his notebook away and looked at the steam plant for a while. 94% efficient, older than both of them, alive because someone had refused to let it be a line item. I priced a building, he said, finally. You were maintaining something else the whole time. That error is mine. It was the longest apology anyone at the firm ever got out of Desmond Hale, and the boiler room, which kept everything told to it, kept that too. The version of the story that traveled through the firm was kinder to Hale than it needed to be, since Wes was its main source. Pearl's version was not kind at all and much more popular. She and Dom told it in the lobby for a week, trading lines like a lounge act, and if Pearl embellished the part where she entered without knocking, she had waited 40 years to be dramatic once and regretted nothing. The strangest fallout was the quietest. Around the firm, the drawer principle spread like a benign rumor. A senior designer comped a struggling nonprofit's rebrand, and told no one, and everyone knew by Thursday. Accounting, of all departments, started a coffee fund with no ledger, an act which for accounting amounted to skydiving. Hale pretended not to notice any of it and adjusted no budgets, which the whole building correctly understood to be his signature on the idea. The posting went up quietly that month. Building Operations Lead, a role written around one man's actual worth, with a budget line for an apprentice because Amos Greeley had taught somebody once, and buildings remember how they were loved. Wes read the posting twice, noticed that someone had specified final authority over all maintenance decisions in language too careful to be an accident, and applied for his own life with a straight face. He took the new role on his own terms, which turned out to be modest ones. Same workshop, same boots. An apprentice named for the budget line, a serious kid from the trade school who reminded exactly one person of a 23-year-old following Amos Greeley through the dark with a flashlight and too many questions. Wes taught him the way he had been taught, hand on the pipes, no manual, and told him the building lied to strangers, and watched the kid decide whether to believe it, which was itself the first lesson. The night it was official, he counted the drawer. He had never counted it. Counting it had always felt like billing. But Josie was at the table doing spelling words, and the drawer was open looking for a rubber band, and the slips of paper were all sitting there, being 8 years of quiet. So he took them out and added them up in pencil, while his daughter watched him the way children watch a parent do something unexplained. It was not $11,000. 11,000 was 1 year, the auditable year. Across the slips it came to a little over $60,000 at his own hourly rate, which he undercharged. "Did it cost a lot, Daddy?" Josie asked. "Mom's rule?" He looked at the number for a while. Somewhere in the stack was a fence, a stroller, a stage curtain, a storm door, a radiator in a school annex that had started everything, though that one predated the drawer and had been filed in a different place, closer to the sternum. "Everything good does, Bug," he said. "That's how you know it's good." She absorbed this with the gravity of a person who had recently learned the word annual. "Are we poor?" "We're rich," he said, "in receipts." And she laughed, and he put the slips back in order, because some men frame their diplomas, and Wes Corrigan kept a drawer of everything he had refused to charge for, and considered himself wealthy in a currency his wife had invented. He kept the drawer. He did, however, start dating the slips, which Annie would have called progress. The first honest work order from the 4th floor arrived on a Tuesday, fittingly. Item, mantel clock, brass, 1931, her father's. Fault, loses 4 minutes a day and strikes 11 whenever it pleases. Note in the comments field of a corporate maintenance system, where anybody could have read it, "It's actually broken," I checked. She brought it to the basement herself. The clock had belonged to Elliot Voss, who had wound it every Friday for 40 years and let no one else touch it, and it had run slow ever since the first Friday nobody wound it. Wes opened the back while she watched, and the workshop filled with the specific quiet of two people who have stopped pretending there is a coffee machine between them. Saturdays happened after that, without either of them proposing Saturdays. She came in weekend clothes that had clearly required thought and pretended they had not. She learned where the good screwdrivers lived and was permitted, after a probationary period, to hand him things. She was terrible at handing him things, and improved, and the morning she handed him the right size before he asked, he looked at her so long that she pretended to read the label on a can of oil. She talked, those mornings, the way she had talked over the coffee machine, except now the machine was honest, and so was everything else. About her father, who had wound the clock every Friday and never once told her she was doing well, in the belief that she would hear it anyway. About the board and how loud a room can be when your name is on the building and nobody in it looks at you. Wes listened the way he diagnosed, without hurry, without interrupting the machine to tell it what it was about to say. Josie was introduced over pancakes to the lady from the clock story and conducted her own audit across the syrup with an 8-year-old's thoroughness. "Do you know how to fix anything?" Josie asked. "Nothing," Naomi said. "I once called your father because a lamp was flickering, and the lamp was fine." Josie considered this with syrup gravity. "He can teach you. He taught me the toilet thing, the flapper." She leaned in, confidential. "It's almost always the flapper." "I have heard this," Naomi said gravely, "about flappers." And across the table, Wes discovered that watching the chief executive officer of a design firm take plumbing advice from a second grader was a thing his chest had apparently been waiting years to feel. The school fair was in May. Naomi arrived unannounced in sneakers, bought a raffle ticket from a first grader with the solemnity of a bond purchase, and lost the ring toss to Josie 4 straight times. She met 3 teachers, 2 of whom had known Annie, and did not flinch from either conversation, and helped to carry a folding table with a confidence that suggested nobody had let her carry anything in years. Somewhere between the bake sale and the dunk tank, Wes watched his daughter take the chief executive's hand to show her the class hamster, and had to stand still a moment over a tray of brownies on account of the dust. "She didn't win the ring toss," Josie reported that night, gravely from under her strong braid. "I let her. Tell her she can come back anyway." The clock took him 3 Saturdays, mostly because he was in no hurry, a fact the clock and everyone else could plainly see. He sourced a mainspring from a horologist upstate who only answered his phone on Wednesdays, cleaned 80 years of Fridays out of the movement, and found, scratched inside the case back in a draftsman's hand, the initials of her father and a date from before she was born. He did not sand them out. He oiled around them. Some repairs are about knowing what to leave. When it finally kept time, striking noon at noon like a citizen, Naomi ran her thumb over the brass and asked, without looking up, what she owed him for this one. "Nothing," Wes said. "I don't charge for you." She looked up then. Outside the workshop window, it was an ordinary afternoon. Freight trucks and pigeons, and neither of them said anything for a moment, because the sentence had come out wearing more than it was dressed in, and both of them knew it, and neither of them called the elevator. They walked out to the parking lot at the pace of the slowest person present, which by then was nobody. By autumn, the 4th floor had the dullest maintenance record in the building. Nothing up there ever broke on purpose again. The tickets that did come were real and specific, and occasionally arrived with coffee, and the queue in the basement told the truth all the way down, which in any building is its own kind of landmark. Some things still got fixed for free. The intern's bicycle, Pearl's heater, straight through her retirement party and past it, house calls now. A radiator once a year in a school annex 6 blocks over, serviced every January by a man who never sent the district a bill and never would. On a Friday morning, the boiler warmed the old pipes, and the first ticket of the day sat on top of the queue, filed from the corner office at 7 a.m. sharp. Clock running 4 minutes slow, it said, "No rush." Come anyway. He printed that one and it went in the drawer which no longer only held what kindness had cost. Neither of them had been looking for this. They had only been looking out for someone else, each of them for years, and one Tuesday, over a machine with nothing wrong with it, they had looked up at the same time.